The alias D.B. Cooper, alternatively Dan Cooper, refers to an unidentified man who hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727 aircraft, in United States airspace on November 24, 1971. During the flight from Portland, Oregon, to Seattle, Washington, Cooper told a flight attendant he had a bomb, and demanded $200,000 in ransom, equivalent to $1,600,000 in 2024, and 4 parachutes upon landing in Seattle. After releasing the passengers in Seattle, Cooper directed the flight crew to refuel the aircraft and begin a second flight to Mexico City, with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. Approximately 30 minutes after taking off from Seattle, Cooper opened the aircraft's aft door, deployed the airstair, and parachuted into the night over southwestern Washington. Cooper's identity, whereabouts, and fate have never been conclusively determined. In 1980, a small portion of the ransom money was found along the riverbanks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. The discovery of the money renewed public interest in the mystery but yielded no additional information about Cooper's identity or fate, and the remaining money was never recovered. For 45 years after the hijacking, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, maintained an active investigation and built an extensive case file but ultimately did not reach any definitive conclusions. The crime remains the only documented unsolved case of air piracy in the history of commercial aviation. The FBI speculates Cooper did not survive his jump for several reasons: the inclement weather, Cooper's lack of proper skydiving equipment, the forested terrain into which he jumped, his lack of detailed knowledge of his landing area, and the disappearance of the remaining ransom money, suggesting it was never spent. In July 2016, the FBI officially suspended active investigation of the case, although reporters, enthusiasts, professional investigators and amateur sleuths continue to pursue numerous theories for Cooper's identity, success and fate. Cooper's hijacking, and several imitators during the next year, immediately prompted major upgrades to security measures for airports and commercial aviation. Metal detectors were installed at airports, baggage inspection became mandatory, and passengers who paid cash for tickets on the day of departure were selected for additional scrutiny. Boeing 727s were retrofitted with eponymous Cooper vanes, designed to prevent the aft staircase from being lowered in flight. By 1973, aircraft hijacking incidents had decreased, as the new security measures dissuaded would-be hijackers whose only motive was money. Chapter 1. Hijacking. On Thanksgiving Eve, November 24, 1971, a man carrying a black attaché case approached the flight counter for Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. Using cash, 1. The man bought a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a 30-minute trip north to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, SeaTac. On his ticket, the man listed his name as Dan Cooper. Eyewitnesses described Cooper as a white male in his mid-40s, with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie, a black raincoat and brown shoes. Carrying a briefcase and a brown paper bag, Cooper boarded Flight 305, a Boeing 727-100, FAA registration N467 US. Cooper took seat 18E in the last row and ordered a drink, a bourbon and 7-Up from a flight attendant. With a crew of 6, consisting of Captain William A. Scott, First Officer William Bill J. Radichat, Flight Engineer Harold E. Anderson, and Flight Attendants Alice Hancock, Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner, and 36 passengers aboard, including Cooper, Flight 305 left Portland on schedule at 2:50 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to Flight Attendant Schaffner, who was sitting in the jump seat at the rear of the airplane, directly behind Cooper. Assuming the note was a lonely businessman's telephone number, Schaffner dropped the note unopened into her purse. Cooper then leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note. In neat, all-capital letters printed with a felt tip pen, Cooper had written, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." Schaffner returned the note to Cooper, sat down as he requested, and asked quietly to see the bomb. He opened his briefcase, and she saw 2 rows of 4 red cylinders, which she assumed were dynamite. Attached to the cylinders were a wire and a large, cylindrical battery, which resembled a bomb. Cooper closed the briefcase and told Schaffner his demands. She wrote a note with Cooper's demands, brought it to the cockpit and informed the flight crew of the situation. Captain Scott directed her to remain in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight and take notes of events as they happen. He then relayed to Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota the hijacker's demands. Cooper requests $200,000 in a knapsack by 5 p.m. He wants 2 front parachutes, 2 back parachutes. He wants the money in negotiable American currency. By requesting 2 sets of parachutes, Cooper implied he planned to take a hostage with him, thereby discouraging authorities from supplying non-functional equipment. With Schaffner in the cockpit, flight attendant Mucklow sat next to Cooper to act as a liaison between him and the flight crew. Cooper then made additional demands. Upon landing at SeaTac, fuel trucks were to meet the plane and all passengers were to remain seated while Mucklow brought the money aboard. He said he would release the passengers after he had the money. The last items brought aboard would be the 4 parachutes. Scott informed SeaTac Air Traffic Control of the situation, who contacted the Seattle Police Department, SPD, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. The passengers were told their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of a minor mechanical difficulty. Donald Nyrop, the president of Northwest at the time, authorized payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate with the hijacker and comply with his demands. For approximately 2 hours, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound to give the SPD and the FBI sufficient time to assemble Cooper's ransom money and parachutes, and to mobilize emergency personnel. During the flight from Portland to Seattle, Cooper demanded Mucklow remain by his side at all times. She later said Cooper appeared familiar with the local terrain. While looking out the window, he remarked, "Looks like Tacoma down there," as the aircraft flew above it. When told the parachutes were coming from McChord Air Force Base, Cooper correctly noted McChord was only a 20-minute drive from SeaTac. She later described the hijacker's demeanor. Cooper was not nervous. He seemed rather nice and he was not cruel or nasty. While the airplane circled Seattle, Mucklow chatted with Cooper and asked why he chose Northwest Airlines to hijack. He laughed and replied, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airlines, it's just because I have a grudge," then explained the flight simply suited his needs. He asked where she was from. She answered she was originally from Pennsylvania, but was living in Minneapolis at the time. Cooper responded that Minnesota was very nice country. She asked where he was from, but he became upset and refused to answer. He asked if she smoked and offered her a cigarette. She replied she had quit, but accepted the cigarette. FBI records note Cooper spoke briefly to an unidentified passenger while the airplane maintained its holding pattern over Seattle. In his interview with FBI agents, passenger George Labissonier stated he visited the restroom directly behind Cooper on several occasions. After one visit, Labissonier said the path to his seat was blocked by a passenger wearing a cowboy hat, questioning Mucklow about the supposed mechanical problem delaying them. Labissonier said Cooper was initially amused by the interaction, then became irritated and told the man to return to his seat, but the cowboy ignored Cooper and continued to question Mucklow. Labissonier claimed he eventually persuaded the cowboy to return to his seat. Mucklow's version of the interaction differed from Labissonier's. She said a passenger approached her and asked for a sports magazine to read because he was bored. She and the passenger moved to an area directly behind Cooper, where they both looked for magazines. The passenger took a copy of The New Yorker and returned to his seat. When Mucklow returned to sit with Cooper, he said, "If that is a sky marshal, I don't want any more of that." But she reassured him there were no sky marshals on the flight. Despite his brief interaction with Cooper, the cowboy was not interviewed by the FBI and was never identified. The $200,000 ransom was received from Seattle First National Bank in a bag weighing approximately 19 pounds, 8.5 kilograms. The money, 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, most of which had serial numbers beginning with L, indicating issuance by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, 24, was photographed on microfilm by the FBI. Seattle police obtained the 2 front, reserve, parachutes from a local skydiving school and the 2 back, main, parachutes from a local stunt pilot. Chapter 2. Passengers released. Around 5:24 Pacific Standard Time, Scott was informed the parachutes had been delivered to SeaTac and notified Cooper they would be landing soon. At 5:46 Pacific Standard Time, Flight 305 landed at SeaTac. With Cooper's permission, Scott parked the aircraft on a partially lit runway, away from the main terminal. Cooper demanded only one representative of the airline approach the plane with the parachutes and money, and the only entrance and exit would be through the aircraft's front door via mobile stairs. Northwest Seattle Operations Manager, Al Lee, was designated to be the courier. To avoid the possibility Cooper might mistake Lee's airline uniform for a law enforcement officer, he changed into civilian clothes for the task. With the passengers remaining seated, a ground crew attached a mobile stair. Per Cooper's directive, Mucklow exited the aircraft through the front door and retrieved the ransom money. When she returned, she carried the money bag past the seated passengers to Cooper in the last row. Cooper then agreed to release the passengers. As they debarked, Cooper inspected the money. In an attempt to break the tension, Mucklow jokingly asked Cooper if she could have some of it. Cooper readily agreed and handed her a packet of bills, but she immediately returned the money and explained accepting gratuities was against company policy. She said Cooper had tried to tip her and the other 2 flight attendants earlier in the flight with money from his pocket, but they had each declined, citing the policy. With the passengers safely debarked, only Cooper and the 6 crew members remained aboard. In accordance with Cooper's demands, Mucklow made 3 trips outside the aircraft to retrieve the parachutes, which she brought to him in the rear of the plane. While Mucklow brought aboard the parachutes, Schaffner asked Cooper if she could retrieve her purse, stored in a compartment behind his seat. Cooper agreed and told her, "I won't bite you." Flight attendant Hancock then asked Cooper if the flight attendants could leave, to which he replied, "Whatever you girls would like," so Hancock and Schaffner debarked. When Mucklow brought the final parachute to Cooper, she gave him printed instructions for using the parachutes, but Cooper said he didn't need them. A problem with the refueling process caused a delay, so a second truck and then a third were brought to the aircraft to complete the refueling. During the delay, Mucklow said Cooper complained the money was delivered in a cloth bag instead of a knapsack as he had directed, and he now had to improvise a new way to transport the money. Using a pocket knife, he cut the canopy from one of the reserve parachutes and stuffed some of the money into the empty parachute bag. An FAA official requested a face-to-face meeting with Cooper aboard the aircraft, but Cooper denied the request. Cooper became impatient, saying, "This shouldn't take so long," and, "Let's get this show on the road." He then gave the cockpit crew his flight plan and directives. A southeast course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft. Approximately 100 knots, 185 km per hour, 115 miles per hour, at a maximum 10,000 foot, 3,000 meters altitude. Cooper also specified the landing gear must remain deployed, the wing flaps must be lowered 15 degrees and the cabin must remain unpressurized. First Officer Radachak informed Cooper that the configuration limited the aircraft's range to about 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers, so a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Cooper and the crew discussed options, and agreed on Reno Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. Cooper further directed the aircraft take off with the rear exit door open and its airstair extended. Northwest officials objected for reasons of safety, but Cooper countered by saying, "It can be done, do it," but then did not insist and said he would lower the staircase once they were airborne. Cooper demanded Mucklow remain aboard to assist the operation. Chapter 3. Back in the air. Around 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off, with only Cooper, Mucklow, Scott, Radachak and flight engineer Anderson aboard. 2 F-106 fighters from McChord Air Force Base and a Lockheed T-33 trainer, diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission, followed the 727. All 3 jets maintained flight patterns to stay behind the slow-moving 727 and out of Cooper's view. After takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to lower the aft staircase. She told him and the flight crew she feared being sucked out of the aircraft. The flight crew suggested she come to the cockpit and retrieve an emergency rope with which she could tie herself to a seat. Cooper rejected the suggestion, stating he did not want her going up front or the flight crew coming back to the cabin. She continued to express her fear to him, and asked him to cut some cord from one of the parachutes to create a safety line for her. He said he would lower the stairs himself, instructed her to go to the cockpit, close the curtain partition between the coach and first-class sections and not return. Before she left, Mucklow begged Cooper, please take the bomb with you." Cooper responded that he would either disarm it or take it with him. As she walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition, she saw Cooper standing in the aisle tying what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. From takeoff to when Mucklow entered the cockpit, 4 to 5 minutes had elapsed. For the rest of the flight to Reno, Mucklow remained in the cockpit, and was the last person to see Cooper. Around 8 p.m., a cockpit warning light flashed, indicating the aft staircase had been deployed. Scott used the plane's intercom to ask Cooper if he needed assistance, but Cooper's last message was a one-word reply: no. The crew's ears popped from the drop in air pressure from the stairs being opened. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upward, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to level flight. In his interview with the FBI, Radachak said the sudden upward pitch occurred while the flight was near the suburbs north of Portland. With the aft cabin door open and the staircase deployed, the flight crew remained in the cockpit, unsure if Cooper was still aboard. Mucklow used the intercom to inform Cooper they were approaching Reno and that he needed to raise the stairs so the airplane could land safely. She repeated her requests as the pilots made the final approach to land, but neither Mucklow nor the flight crew received a reply from Cooper. At 11:02 p.m., with the aft staircase still deployed, Flight 305 landed at Reno Tahoe International Airport. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff's deputies and Reno police established a perimeter around the aircraft but, fearing the hijacker and the bomb were still aboard, did not approach the plane. Scott searched the cabin, confirmed Cooper was no longer aboard and, after a 30-minute search, an FBI bomb squad declared the cabin safe. Chapter 4. Investigation. In addition to 66 latent fingerprints aboard the plane, FBI agents recovered Cooper's black clip-on tie clip and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened and had 3 shroud lines cut from the canopy. FBI agents interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle and Reno, and developed a series of composite sketches. Local police and FBI agents immediately began questioning possible suspects. In a rush to meet a deadline, reporter James Long of the Oregon Journal recorded the name, Dan Cooper, as D.B. Cooper. United Press International Wire Service reporter Clyde Jabin republished Long's error, and as other media sources repeated the error, the hijacker's pseudonym became D.B. Cooper. Acting on the possibility the hijacker may have used his real name, or the same alias in a previous crime, Portland police discovered and interviewed a Portland citizen named D.B. Cooper. The Portland Cooper had a minor police record, but was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Due to the number of variables and parameters, precisely defining the area to search was difficult. The jet's airspeed estimates varied. The environmental conditions along the flight path varied with the aircraft's location and altitude, and only Cooper knew how long he remained in free fall before pulling his ripcord. The F-106 pilots neither saw anyone jumping from the airliner, nor did their radar detect a deployed parachute. A black-clad man jumping into the moonless night would be difficult to see, especially given the limited visibility, cloud cover and lack of ground lighting. The T-33 pilots did not make visual contact with the 727. On December 6, 1971, 12 days after the incident, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved the use of an Air Force State Route 71 Blackbird to retrace and photograph Flight 305's flight path, and attempt to locate the items Cooper carried during his jump. The State Route 71 made 5 flights to retrace Flight 305's route, but due to poor visibility, the photography attempts were unsuccessful. In an experimental recreation, flying the same aircraft used in the hijacking in the same flight configuration, FBI agents pushed a 200-pound, 91-kilogram, sled out of the open airstair and were able to reproduce the upward motion of the tail section and brief change in cabin pressure described by the flight crew at 8:13 p.m. Initial extrapolations placed Cooper's landing zone within an area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin, an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. Search efforts concentrated on Clark and Cowlitz counties, encompassing the terrain immediately south and north of the Lewis River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the largely forested terrain on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also performed. Other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yale Lake, the reservoir immediately to its east. Neither Cooper nor any of the equipment he presumably carried was found. Using fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard, the FBI coordinated an aerial search along the entire flight path, known as Victor 23 in U.S. aviation terminology, and as Vector 23 inches in most Cooper literature, from Seattle to Reno. Although numerous broken treetops and several pieces of plastic and other objects resembling parachute canopies were sighted and investigated, nothing relevant to the hijacking was found. Soon after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents aided by some 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with United States Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for 18 days in March, and then another 18 days in April. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot, 61 meters, depths of Lake Merwin. 2 local women stumbled upon a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County. It was later identified as the remains of Barbara Ann Derry, a teenage girl who had been abducted and murdered several weeks before. Ultimately, the extensive search and recovery operation uncovered no significant material evidence related to the hijacking. Based on early computer projections produced for the FBI, Cooper's drop zone was first estimated to be between Ariel Dam to the north and the town of Battleground, Washington, to the south. In March 1972, after a joint investigation with Northwest Orient Airlines and the Air Force, the FBI determined Cooper probably jumped over the town of La Center, Washington. In 2019, the FBI released a report detailing the burglary of a grocery store, about 3 hours after Cooper jumped, near Hyson, Washington. Hyson, an unincorporated community, was within the calculated drop zone Northwest Airlines presented to the FBI. In the report, the FBI noted the burglar took only survival items, such as beef jerky and gloves. However, the report notes that the burglar wore military-type boots with a corrugated, sole, while Cooper was described as wearing slip-on shoes. Chapter 4. Search for ransom money. A month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed lists of the ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, businesses with routine transactions involving large amounts of cash, and to law enforcement agencies around the world. Northwest Orient offered a reward of 15% of the recovered money, to a maximum of $25,000. In early 1972, U.S. Attorney General John N. Mitchell released the serial numbers to the general public. 2 men used counterfeit $20 bills printed with Cooper serial numbers to swindle $30,000 from a Newsweek reporter named Carl Fleming in exchange for an interview with a man they falsely claimed was the hijacker. In early 1973, with the ransom money still missing, the Oregon Journal republished the serial numbers and offered $1,000, equivalent to $7,083 in 2024, to the first person to turn in a ransom bill to the newspaper or any FBI field office. In Seattle, the Post-Intelligencer made a similar offer with a $5,000 reward. The offers remained in effect until Thanksgiving 1974, and though several near matches were reported, no genuine bills were found. In 1975, Northwest Orient's insurer, Global Indemnity Company, complied with an order from the Minnesota Supreme Court and paid the airlines $180,000, equivalent to $1,100,000 in 2024, claim on the ransom money. Chapter 5. Later developments. Analysis of the flight data indicated the first estimated location of Cooper's landing zone was inaccurate. Captain Scott, who was flying the aircraft manually because of Cooper's speed and altitude demands, determined the flight path was farther east than initially reported. Additional data provided by Continental Airlines pilot Tom Boeing, who was flying 4 minutes behind Flight 305, led the FBI to recalculate their estimates for Cooper's drop zone. Boeing noted the FBI's calculations for Cooper's drop zone were based on incorrectly recorded wind direction, and therefore the FBI's estimates were inaccurate. Based on Boeing's data and subsequent recalculations of the flight path, the FBI determined Cooper's drop zone was probably over the Washougal River watershed. In 1986, FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach wrote, "I have to confess, if I were going to look for Cooper, I would head for the Washougal. The Washougal Valley and the surrounding areas have been repeatedly searched, but no discoveries traceable to the hijacking have been reported, and the FBI believes any remaining physical clues were probably destroyed in the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens." Chapter 5. Investigation suspended. On July 8, 2016, when Cooper was assumed to be at least 85 years old if alive, the FBI announced active investigation of the Cooper case was suspended, citing the need to deploy investigative resources and manpower on issues of greater and more urgent priority. Local field offices would continue to accept any legitimate physical evidence, related specifically to the parachutes or to the ransom money. The 66-volume case file compiled during the 45-year course of the investigation would be preserved for historical purposes at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and on the FBI website. All of the evidence is open to the public. The crime remains the only documented unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. Chapter 6. Physical Evidence. During their forensic search of the aircraft, FBI agents found 4 major pieces of evidence, each with a direct physical link to Cooper. A black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, a hair from Cooper's headrest, and 8 filter-tipped Raleigh cigarette butts from the armrest ashtray.